What if I told you that right in the heart of Europe, just a short flight from Berlin, Warsaw, or Prague, there is a country where one man has ruled for more than 3 decades? Where elections are widely seen as theater, where journalists can disappear into prison cells, where protesters are beaten in the streets, and where the shadow of the Soviet Union never really disappeared. This is Belarus. Often called Europe's last dictatorship, Belarus is one of the most mysterious and misunderstood countries on the continent. It's a place of grand Soviet boulevards, forests stretching for miles, surprisingly modern cities, and people who live caught between 2 worlds, the promises of modern Europe and the pull of an authoritarian past. But what is daily life actually like there? How did this country become one of the last authoritarian strongholds in Europe? Why has its leader, Alexander Lukashenko, managed to stay in power for so long? And what does it mean for ordinary Belarusians to live under a regime where dissent can carry a very real cost? Today, we're taking a deep dive into Belarus, its history, culture, economy, politics, and the reality of life inside a country that many describe as frozen in time. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why Belarus is unlike anywhere else in Europe. To understand Belarus today, we need to go back. Long before it became an independent country, Belarus was a land repeatedly caught between powerful empires. Over centuries, it was controlled by the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and eventually the Russian Empire. This long history shaped Belarusian identity in complicated ways. Unlike countries such as Poland or Hungary, Belarus never had centuries of strong independent statehood to build a deeply rooted national consciousness. Its culture was often overshadowed by larger neighbors. Then came the Soviet era. After the Russian Revolution and years of political upheaval, Belarus became one of the founding republics of the Soviet Union in 1922. And this period changed the country forever. During World War II, Belarus suffered one of the most devastating losses of any nation on Earth. Roughly a quarter of its population was killed. Entire villages were burned. Cities were flattened. To this day, the scars of that destruction remain deeply embedded in Belarusian memory. After the war, the Soviet Union rebuilt Belarus rapidly. Massive industrialization transformed it into one of the USSR's manufacturing hubs. Factories produced tractors, trucks, electronics, and machinery exported across the Soviet bloc. Minsk, the capital, was almost entirely reconstructed in monumental Soviet style. Wide avenues, giant government buildings, and architecture designed to project order and power. Life under Soviet rule came with familiar trade-offs. There was guaranteed employment, free education, and state-provided housing. But there was also censorship, political repression, and strict control over public life. Unlike some other Soviet republics that pushed harder for independence in the late 1980s, Belarus remained relatively loyal to Moscow. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many Belarusians felt uncertainty rather than celebration. That uncertainty created the conditions for the rise of one man, Alexander Lukashenko. Before politics, Lukashenko was a collective farm director and a former Soviet border guard. He entered national politics as an anti-corruption populist, presenting himself as a tough outsider who would clean up a chaotic system. In 1994, Belarus held what is widely considered its first and only genuinely competitive presidential election. Lukashenko won. At first, many people saw him as exactly what the country needed. The post-Soviet 1990s were brutal across Eastern Europe. Inflation was spiraling. Economies were collapsing. Organized crime was rising. While neighboring Russia and Ukraine experienced economic chaos, Lukashenko promised stability. And that promise became the foundation of his rule. But once in power, he moved quickly. He expanded presidential authority through controversial referendums. He weakened parliament. He tightened control over the courts. Independent media came under pressure. Political opponents began disappearing. Over time, Belarus evolved into a highly centralized authoritarian state. Lukashenko built a system where loyalty to him became loyalty to the state itself. For more than 30 years, he has remained in power through elections that international observers have repeatedly criticized as neither free nor fair. This is why he earned the nickname, Europe's last dictator. But here's where things get more complex. Unlike some dictators who rely solely on brute force, Lukashenko maintained support for years through a social contract. The deal was simple. The state would provide stability, low unemployment, basic social services, and relatively low inequality. In exchange, citizens were expected to stay out of politics. For a long time, many accepted this arrangement, especially older generations who remembered the chaos of the Soviet collapse. And this shaped everyday life in Belarus. On the surface, life can seem surprisingly normal. Minsk is clean, orderly, and remarkably safe. Public transport is efficient. Infrastructure is generally well maintained. Education standards are relatively strong. Healthcare, while imperfect, remains accessible. Walk through central Minsk and you'll see stylish cafes, modern shopping centers, and young people using the latest smartphones. At first glance, it may not feel like life under dictatorship. And that's precisely what makes Belarus so fascinating. Authoritarianism there often operates quietly. It doesn't always announce itself with tanks in the streets. It appears in subtler ways. The self-censorship in conversations. The avoidance of political topics in public. The understanding that criticism of the government can bring consequences. The knowledge that surveillance is real. Many Belarusians live with an unspoken awareness of invisible boundaries. Cross them, and life can change very quickly. This became painfully clear in 2020. That year, Belarus held another presidential election. The official results claimed Lukashenko had won by a landslide. Huge numbers of Belarusians believed the vote was rigged. Mass protests erupted across the country. For weeks, hundreds of thousands filled the streets in what became the largest demonstrations in Belarusian history. The response was brutal. Security forces beat protesters. Thousands were detained. Reports of torture emerged from detention centers. Independent journalists were arrested. Opposition leaders were jailed or forced into exile. The crackdown shocked the world and revealed the true extent of repression beneath Belarus's carefully controlled image. Since then, political freedoms have shrunk even further, and hundreds of political prisoners have remained behind bars, even amid occasional high-profile releases. This brings us to Belarus's relationship with Russia. And this relationship is absolutely central to understanding the country. Belarus and Russia are deeply intertwined. They share close linguistic, cultural, and historical ties. Russian is the dominant language in daily life for many Belarusians. Economically, Belarus depends heavily on Russian energy subsidies, trade, and financial support. The two countries are formally linked through the so-called Union State, an arrangement aimed at deep integration. Yet Lukashenko has always walked a careful line. For years, he tried balancing between Russia and the West, extracting benefits from both sides. He resisted becoming fully subordinate to Moscow. But after the 2020 protests, his position weakened dramatically. Increasingly isolated from Europe and dependent on Kremlin backing, he moved closer to Vladimir Putin. That dependence became unmistakable when Belarus allowed its territory to be used as a staging ground during Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This deeply damaged Belarus's international standing. Many Western countries imposed additional sanctions, and many Belarusians opposed the country's involvement. For ordinary people, this alignment with Russia has had real consequences. Economic pressure, travel restrictions, international isolation, and growing uncertainty about Belarus's future sovereignty. Now let's talk about the economy. Belarus has a strange economic model. It's neither fully capitalist nor fully socialist. Large parts of the economy remain state-controlled. Major industries such as manufacturing, agriculture, and energy are heavily influenced by the government. This has produced mixed results. On one hand, Belarus avoided some of the extreme inequality and oligarch-driven chaos seen in other post-Soviet states. On the other hand, it has struggled with inefficiency, low innovation, and dependence on external support. The country is known for manufacturing heavy vehicles, fertilizers, machinery, and agricultural products. IT also became a surprising success story. For years, Minsk developed a growing tech sector. Belarusian programmers contributed to globally successful apps and software. Some of the creators behind major digital products came from Belarus. But after the political crackdowns, many tech professionals fled to countries like Poland, Lithuania, and Georgia. This brain drain hit one of the country's most dynamic sectors. For average citizens, wages remain significantly lower than in Western Europe. Opportunities can feel limited. Many young Belarusians dream of leaving. Yet many also stay, bound by family, identity, and hope for change. The country has a unique blend of Eastern Slavic traditions, Soviet legacy, and local customs. Religion is mainly Eastern Orthodox, though Catholic communities are also significant, especially in Western regions. Minsk offers striking Soviet architecture mixed with modern development. And perhaps that's what defines Belarus most. It is a country suspended between past and future, between East and West, between authoritarian control and democratic aspiration. For journalists and activists, this limbo is dangerous. Independent reporting is heavily restricted. Media outlets have been shut down. Journalists face harassment, arrest, and imprisonment. The state tightly controls television and major information channels. Online spaces are monitored. Even social media can become evidence. For ordinary people, this creates an atmosphere where silence often feels safer than speaking. And yet resistance persists. Belarusians continue finding ways to organize, document abuses, and preserve hope. The story of Belarus is not simply one of oppression. It is also one of resilience. A people navigating extraordinary political pressure while holding on to identity, dignity, and the possibility of change. So what is life really like in Europe's last dictatorship? It is not constant, visible terror. It is something more complicated. It is going to work, meeting friends, raising families, studying, laughing, and living ordinary lives, while carrying the constant awareness that certain truths cannot be spoken too loudly. It is stability paired with fear, order paired with repression, normality built on control. Belarus reminds us that dictatorship in the modern world does not always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks clean, efficient, quiet, and that quiet can hide a great deal. The future of Belarus remains uncertain. Will it move closer to democracy? Will Russian influence deepen further? Will a new generation reshape the country? No one knows. But what is certain is this: Belarus is one of the most important political stories in Europe today, and understanding it helps us understand how freedom can erode, how power consolidates, and how ordinary people endure under extraordinary circumstances. If you found this video insightful, make sure to subscribe to the channel because we dive deep into the world's most fascinating and complex countries every single week. And tell us in the comments, could you imagine living in a place like this? Now click on one of the videos appearing on your screen right now to keep exploring the hidden realities of our world. See you in the next one.